So this is the solution for our Acme users application. So this is actually the live site, um, and we've got some data that some people have put in here already, and we've got our departments, and we can switch between different departments. We can add an employee to a department. We could also modify a department to make it the default department. So this is HR. We could make this the default department. And now we've got HR showing up here. We could switch our departments back to the Department of Code as the default department. And we've got the concept of customers. So we can create a customer. And we can make this customer an employee. And this customer will end up getting added to the default department. So let's start out by focusing on what our models are going to end up looking like. Let's actually also do it within the context of, for our models, I think it makes sense to do some test-driven development just to get this set up. We could get this set up outside of the context of routes. So right now I've got an empty directory here, and I'm going to say npm init. And now I'm going to say, what I want to be able to do is to run npm test and test my application. Right now, the only thing that I have here is this. And what I really want to be able to do is to say something like this, which is going to be, I'll pass in a database URL for testing. And my database URL is going to be Postgres. And we'll say Acme users demo test. And we'll specify that we're going to use NodeMon. And I'm going to specify, I'm going to say node modules. And this is Mocha bin Mocha. And these are going to be my tests that are going to end up running. Right now, this is not going to do much for me because I don't actually even have Mocha installed. Let's get Mocha installed. So for testing, and we're just going to test our model, so we're not going to actually even put in super test here. I'm going to grab in Mocha, Chai, and I'm also going to, so Mocha and Chai, I'm going to save this as dev. npm install Mocha, Chai, save dev. And I'm also going to need Sequelize and Postgres. And those I'm just going to save. And we could go and actually start setting up our model. So right now, if I just said npm test, I would see that I have no test directory. And we're just going to write a couple of tests here. But in writing a couple of tests, we're actually going to get a good chunk of our app set up. So let's go in here and we're going to create our test directory. And just for starters, we'll say modelspec.js. So we're going to describe our models. And we could go over here and just do something like we know we're going to have a department model, so we could specify something like expect department to be okay. And on the same token, we're going to say expect user to be okay. And let's just make sure that we bring in our expect by saying require chai expect. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And so let's try this. Actually, we're still not finding Mocha, which means I probably have misspelled something in my package JSON, and it's not node module, it's node modules. Let's try this one more time. And we get an error that we expect, which is department is not defined. So just as a basic startup here, what we could do is specify that we're going to have some database object that's going to be in a DB directory. From there, we're going to have models. And from there, let's expect that we're going to have a models.user. And again, that's going to fail us quite a bit because it's not going to find DB. But let's go over here and just to sort of get things set up, we'll add a DB folder. We'll add an index file. And just to get our test to pass, we could specify user is some object, department is some object, and we will say module.exports, and we'll say models, and for the user model, we'll pass this back, and for the department model, we'll pass department back. Again, we're just trying to get our tests set up so that we get something passing, which we do. Now, obviously, we're going to want to modify this and bring Postgres in to go and set up these models, and this is what we'll end up doing next. So I know when I run my tests, one of the things that I want to do is I want to start out with not empty data. I want to start out with a controlled structure in my data. I want to know what's in there so I could end up running my tests. I want it to behave the same every single time. So one of the things that I want to do here is that I'm going to do it before each, and I'm going to do two of them here. And in my first one, I'm going to specify that with my DB, I should be able to go and I should be able to sync. Now what sync is going to do, sync is going to create my tables, right? But again, when you're looking at the code here, this is not specifying anything about sequelize, but within DB, I'm going to end up using sequelize. And here, I'm going to call done. And I'm going to do my catch and do done as well. So, of course, now if I go to, let me actually go here and make sure that I pass my done in here to my before each. So I want to make sure that my tables end up getting created. And it says DB sync is not a function, okay? And just to show you one other thing is that we only need to set up our tables once. So instead of having that my tables get created before every test, one of the things that I could do is instead of before each, I could just say before. I think that'll work, but let's see. And what that should end up doing is only getting called once, but we could actually check that out to see that happens. Console.log tables are created. And so what I'm going to do here is go back to my index and start building this out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in sequelize. And I'm going to set up this DB object, which is going to be new, sequelize, and I'm going to use process environment database URL. So this is that parameter that we passed in here that's going to tell us where the database is. Now the database doesn't exist yet. We'll end up creating it. And for user, I'm going to say DB define, and this will be, we're going to call this user. And for now, we're just going to go and make this second parameter an empty object. We'll end up adding our attributes to it in a little bit. We just want to see that we can get our database created here. So now we've got our DB, and we're going to have a method called sync, and I'm going to define sync. It's going to look something like this. So what sync will do is it'll take DB, it'll sync. I want it to force the tables to get created. force is true. And again, this is a promise, so I want to return it. So I've got a then. So now I've got a sync. I've got my two models. Let's take a look and see what the test ends up doing. So I've got a syntax error here. And the problem that I ran into here is that SQLize host not found, Acme users demo test. Now, hopefully, if I go over here and I open up pSQL and I say create database Acme users demo test, and I go back here and I kill this and I rerun this command. And what this tells me is that probably database URL, and one of the things that I did here is I forgot to put in localhost. So it's actually localhost and then the name of the database. So I had a bad connection string. Let's kill that. Start it off again. And it's telling me Acme users demo test doesn't exist. And let's see what I created it as. Not Acme user, Acme user. So I'm going to drop database Acme user demo test. And I will create database Acme users demo test. I'm going to go back over here, kill this, say npm test. And so that's telling me that I should have my database. And if I do, then I should be able to connect to my Acme users demo test. Let's see, I think I've got the wrong backslash here, or the wrong slash. Acme users demo test. So now I'm connected to that. So if I do a D to describe the database, I could see my departments and I could see my users. So that is fine. One other thing that I probably want to do is to sync some data in there. So it'd be nice if I had 3 users and had each of the users in a department so I could see that this is working. And again, that'll take me a long way in terms of getting my database set up. So we'll go over here. And so we've got our sync here that we're going to run before, and let's actually put in a before each, so this should run every time. So the difference is we only need to create our database once, but since we're going to be manipulating the data and we want it to start off the same every time, we're going to do a DB, and this is going to be a seed. So this is where we're going to seed our data. And once we end up seeding our data, we'll come in here. We can just put a console.log seeded. And we could go over here and we could specify done. So now, again, we don't have a seed. We're going to have to figure out what that seed is going to end up looking like. But for now, let's go over here. And we'll run our command, and it's telling us db seed is not a function. So let's just think about for a second when we end up doing this db seed. What we're going to want to do is that we're not going to recreate the database every time for our test. We're just going to do one before, but before each of the tests, we're going to end up seeding. So when we go to seed, one of the things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to clear out our tables. So we'll put in seed over here, and once we end up going to seed, that wasn't a great expression. Once we end up doing this, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to want to clear out our users and our departments. And so one thing we could do, I'm going to bring in Bluebird, because it's going to come in handy for me. So I'm going to say npm install Bluebird. I'm going to save. And I'll go up here and I'm going to say promise equals require Bluebird. Again, we're still just writing tests at the moment, getting things set up, but as we're doing it and getting this to pass, we're going to build these things out. So when we go to seed, what I'm going to specify is I'm going to do a promise.all. Promise.all takes two promises, and I could run these. When you're running promise.all, what you're saying is you're saying the order doesn't really matter. And we could go over here, and we could say, well, actually, the order might matter a little bit, so we'll take this in two different spots. We'll specify that what I want to do is I'm going to say user dot destroy. So I can destroy now. Sequelize doesn't like me to use destroy. Well, possibly it wouldn't mind. Let's test it out. We'll see what happens. So we'll say sequelize destroy, and we'll just put a where clause that says, hey, look, where everything, right? We don't really care which ones we're destroying. And then once we go and we destroy, again, we're just sort of truncating our tables here. We'll return a department.destroy where. And again, the rationale behind this is that the user depends on the department. So the department is really going to be the parent of the user because each user has a department ID. So databases don't like you to destroy parent records before you destroy child records. So we destroy the child records first, and then we can go and destroy the parent records. And then after we do that, then let's go over here. And just for starters, we could do a return promise.all, and I'm going to pass in two promises, and I'm going to create two users. So I will say user.create, name is Larry. Actually, we'll start out with Mo. And I'll do a user.create, name is Mo and Larry. So we're going to have two users that we end up creating. And let's also, while we're here, we'll start out with these two, just to sort of see if we're able to get this working. Look at our data. So we're destroying all the users. We're destroying all of the departments. And while we're up here, let's start actually, let's move these two things down. And a user is going to have a name. So this is going to be a name, and this is going to be a sequelize string. And actually, it's going to be the same thing for department. So we've got a user, we've got a department. Well, let's just see what ends up happening when we end up running our tests here. And we also just need to make sure that when we end up specifying that seed is going to be a promise, we've just got to make sure that we return this promise. So we're chaining this promise together. This ends up passing, and we can see what we're doing, right? We're deleting from users, we're deleting from departments. And now just to see that, what this looks like, if we went back here and we said select star from users, we would have Mo and Larry. Okay? Let's do one other thing here. So again, this is just going to help us set up our data here, which is once we end up seeding our data, let's think about what else we could end up seeding our data with. So what we're going to end up doing is that we're going to end up specifying, we want to make sure that we have a default department. And so what we'll do is we could do this a couple of different ways, but one of the things that we can do here is to specify that, hey, look, a department is going to have some get default method, and it's going to return our default department. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that as a starting point, our default department is going to end up being accounting. It's something that we could always change. So let's assume we don't have it yet, and this is going to break, but we're going to specify department get default. This is a class method for department that doesn't yet exist, and if we were to go and run this, then we would get a failure because get default is not a function, right? And on the same token, we'll also say department.create, and we'll have two departments. We'll have engineering, and accounting is going to be our default department. So how do we go about creating that? Again, we're not really testing all that much, but just in building out our seed function gives us a fair amount of functionality. And now what this allows us to do is to go back here, and we've done these before, but this is a case in point where it's a nice place for a class method. So we could say class methods, this is an object, and this is going to be get default. And so the get default method, what is it going to look like? Well, the get default method is going to need to find a department where is default is true. So we don't even have this yet, so let's actually put in is default. And this is going to be, and here let's actually set it up as an object. We'll say the type is going to be sequelize Boolean. And we'll say, let's actually give it a default value. So we have a default value in there, we'll make this false. So by default, departments are not set as true. And we'll go over here and we'll specify that what we're going to do is we're going to say, this is a class method. So we could say this dot find one. And this could be our where. And we say where is default is true. And this is going to be a promise. So, and again, we need to make sure that we return this. So this is going to be a promise, and we're going to get a then here. And we'll go over here and we'll see, well, did we find our department? Does it exist when we call get default? Right? Is there one where default is true? If there is, we're just going to return the department. And if there isn't, so we'll say if department, return it. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to specify, we're going to return department create, and we'll say name is accounting, and we'll specify is default is true. So next time through, we will have a default department. So now we have our class method. By the way, one thing that I did here, which is important, I didn't put this inside of here. And the reason for that is that once you end up getting into these callbacks out here, this does point to my department. When I get in here, it actually points to something else. So there are a couple of different ways that you could get around this, but it's just as easy to actually grab department and call department.create. And at this point, I should end up getting these to pass. Furthermore, if I select star from departments, I'll see that accounting is, in fact, the default department. The only other thing that I want to throw out here would be nice if one of the things that I could do, so it might be nice if we ended up getting back from our seed method some data that we could end up using. And so one of the things that we could end up doing here is that in order to, it would be, so one of the things we could do here, if just, I could do this right off the bat, which is that I can end up going over here, right, this is our seed method, and, you know, I'm doing a promise.all with this data, and one of the things we know, if we do promise.all, right, that means all of our promises are satisfied. And if I just went in here and I said result, I could do something like console.log. And if I say, I'll also show you one other thing here. If I say result 0, this should be Mo, right? Because there's 4 promises. The first one was Mo getting created. And I'll actually see that I see a ton of stuff here with Mo. But if you really just want to see Mo's data, one of the things you could do whenever you have a SQLized object, you could call get on it, and it gives you a much shorter look into Mo. So now I just see I have Mo, and if I go over here, this is going to be Larry. And if I go over here, this is going to be, actually, let's make that 2. This is going to be my default department of accounting, right? And if I make this 3, this is going to be my non-default department of engineering. But it would be nice if I could do something like this. Instead of saying result, it would be nice if I could do something like Mo. I'll show you why I'm doing the underscores in a second. Larry, accounting, and engineering. It'd be nice if I could do something like that. And the fact is that you can do this, but you can't do it with then, because then just gives you an array. But if I have a promise, and I think this is only going to work for a Bluebird promise. I'm not sure that the default promise out of the box gives you this, but I could say spread. Meaning, and what this really does is says, hey, look, you have a result array, spread it out. Spread it out into Mo, Larry, accounting, engineering, and that just makes it a little bit easier for me to do something like mo.get. And let's just see how that works out. Yeah, so now I just have Mo, and I could get Larry. And this is just going to make it a little bit easier for me to do some of my testing here. Again, I haven't really written a ton of code in terms of what is actually going on with our application, but just writing the seeding stuff, I've taken care of one of the most important things, which is to have a default department. So at this point, one of the things that I could do here is that I could just set up some variables over here. Mo, Larry, accounting, engineering. And this is my seeded data. And I could go over here and say, well, Mo is equal to Mo. That's why I did the underscore. Larry is equal to Larry. Accounting is equal to accounting, which I know is my default department. And engineering is equal to engineering. So this will actually go and allow me to do a few things here. And so this is, sort of helps me with my setup. I mean, one thing we could do is, if we wanted to describe Mo, what could we say about Mo? Well, Mo is Mo, right? And we could go over here. And again, all this has now been set up in my before each. So here I could just write an expectation, mo.name to equal Mo. And again, since this is running every time, I've got Mo, Larry, and Curly. Now I should get 2 tests to pass, but this is actually incorrect because Mo is capitalized, capital M. Now it says Mo is Mo. And just so we could sort of see this, one of the things we specified is that tables are created. We only see this happening once. One other thing we could do here if we wanted to is to make this read a little bit better by going into my file. And you've seen this before where when we specify our DB, I'm going to move this down one, there's a parameter where we can set some things, and I could go over here and say logging is false. And what that should do is just make this a little bit more readable, right? Tables are created, seeded, and again, it's getting seeded before every example. So exists, Mo is Mo, and I could comment a couple of things out here just so this maybe reads a little bit better here. We've seen that our syncing just happens once. So we know that we have a way to have a default department. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the relationship between the between the users and the departments. And again, the take here is that a user that has a department is going to be considered an employee. So one of the things we'll do is that we'll have a way of setting it up so that we can add Mo to accounting, and we could add Larry to engineering, and we'll set up some of our methods that are going to make life a little bit easier when we go and start setting up our routes. So let's work with Mo a little bit more, and we'll describe Mo can be added to accounting. And how do we know if Mo is going to be part of accounting? Well, we'll start out by writing our expectation. And our expectation is going to be that Mo has a department of accounting. And how's that going to work? Well, we'll have an expectation, and our expectation is going to be Mo dot, we'll say he's going to have a department dot name to equal accounting. It's going to take us a little bit to get here, but we'll end up getting here. Right now that's not going to work because Mo's not even going to have, there's no department that's associated with Mo. So if we go over here, cannot read property name of undefined because Mo doesn't have a department. So this is going to be something that's going to be asynchronous. So let's put it done here. And how's this going to work? Well, we've got Mo. So one of the things we could do is we could say Mo, and we'll specify that Mo's department ID is going to be, and we've also got accounting, and we'll say his accounting.id. So Mo's going to have a department ID of accounting. We'll specify that we're going to save Mo. And then when we end up saving Mo, we'll get this function back. And after we end up saving Mo, we've got an ID for Mo. So let's actually return. And what we'll do is we'll say user find by ID. And we'll specify that the ID is going to be Mo's ID. And we're just going to put a second thing in here, which is going to allow us to do our includes. And we'll say we're going to include department because a user is going to belong to a department. Now, it doesn't yet, but that's what we're going to set up here. And once we end up doing that, we should end up getting Mo back yet again. And if we end up going over here, we could take this expectation, put it here. And here we would be specifying that we've got Mo, and we should have loaded his department, and his department should end up having a name. And then we could call done, and we could go over here and just put in a catch and specify done as well, just in case there's any kind of error. And there will be an error. One of the errors that we're going to have is that a user has no affiliation with department, right? Department is not associated with a user. This is a really easy thing to do because if we go back up to our model, we've got our user and we've got our department, and simply by saying user belongs to department. And by default, what that's going to do is that a user is going to have a association with department. From a database perspective, we're going to have an attribute added for department ID. And if we, just by doing that, we should actually get our test to pass, which is great. And if we go and we actually take a look at our Postgres and we say describe users, we'll see that a user actually has a department ID, which is an integer, and it actually even sets up the foreign key relation to that. And again, that allows us to go over here and get the users that are in this, get the department that's associated with this user, right? So here we're saying that Mo can be added to accounting. which is nice. So we've specified that we have that association. So that's one test that we could end up writing. The other thing that we might want to do is have a class method which allows us to get the users by a specific department. Now, one thing that we probably want to do here is actually set up some users, for departments, but we could actually do a describe here, and we could describe employees in accounting. What would that look like? Now, again, our before each is going to run every time, and we're not seeding actual users in any departments when we start out. We're able to do that here, which is totally fine. But starting off, employees in accounting, if we just went to start out here, we could do a little copy and pasting here. Or we could actually just go up here and say to start out, employees in accounting, accounting starting out has no employees. So what is that going to look like? So one of the things that we could end up doing is that we want to find all the users that have a particular department. So we could go over here and we could say user, and we're going to find all the users. There's two different directions that you could end up going with this, but we could say we're going to find user, find employees, and so we're going to find the employees of what department. We're going to use the accounting ID. This is going to give us our users. And we're going to specify, if we go over here, let's put a done here. What do we expect? We expect users, and we're going to say that it's going to be equal to, not the exact object, but this is going to be an empty array. Done, catch, done. So here we're looking at the employees in accounting, and if we went to look at this, we would see that this would fail because find employees is not a function of user. But if we go back up here, and now this is going to be a class method on user. So we go over here, add our class methods. Find employees is a class method. And we'll specify user, find all. And our parameter here is going to be a where. And it's going to be where department ID is equal to department ID that was passed in. So once we end up doing that, we've got our find employees with this department ID. And again, it's important to realize, where does this department ID come in? You sort of forget about this a little bit, is that when we say user belongs to department, by default, it'll end up, and there's ways to control this, but it'll set up a foreign key on user for department ID. So once we do that, cannot read property, and again, that's my same old issue of forgetting to return this. So now we've got the ability to find all the employees for a given department. Probably a couple of other things that are, might be worth doing at this point, just to sort of, at this point we can, get our users by department. We've got our user object. We've got our department object that's going to allow us to create a user. It's going to allow us to create a department. One other thing that we might want to do here is to do a set default department. So what is that going to look like? So if we describe set default, and we'll describe set default, and we'll specify engineering can be set as default. So what is that going to look like? Well, one of the things that we're going to want to do here, if we're going to want to set that up, first let's actually get engineering. And we'll say engineering, which we have. We're going to say set default. We're going to make this our default department. And once we end up setting this up as our default department, let's do a then. And what do we expect to have happen? We expect that write an expectation, engineering, and this will be, let's actually do this. So when we go to set engineering as our default, we should be able to say, now return department get default. And this should get us our default department, and then we could put a then here. This should be engineering. And we should be able to write an expectation that we expect engineering is default to be true. And we'll just put a catch here for done over here. Now again, this method doesn't exist. Now we're looking at an instance method. We're looking at an instance method for engineering. And if we do this, we see engineering set default is not a function. Now, the one thing that we want to do here is we want to make sure, so this is going to be on our departments. We've already got one class method, and now we're going to do set default. So one of the things that we could end up doing here is we could specify, we've got to actually do two things. We've got this item which we're setting, so we could specify this dot is default is equal to true, right? The other thing that we want to do here is we want to actually get the one that's currently the default. So we could go over here and we could specify now, again, wherein, this is actually incorrect, this is not going to be a class method, this is going to be an instance method. So this is going to be instance methods, and this is going to be set default. We won't save it yet, but we'll go over here. We don't have to really get too fancy with this, but we'll say this is default, is true. We haven't saved it yet. And let's actually get our current default. So this is going to be department get default. And when we end up going and getting our default, we'll say that this is going to be our current one. So here's our current department, and we'll say current dot is default is equal to false. So now I've got my this is default, but again, my problem is that I'm going to lose my this inside of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify new default is equal to this. So my new default department is pointing to this. This is default, is set to true, and I could even reverse this a little bit. New default is equal to true. Again, it's a little bit tricky because you have this context switch here. Once you get into then, this is going to point to something else. So you just have to be aware of using this within your callbacks. But now I've got my current, now I've got my new default. And what this allows me to do, and I can do this in one step, or I could do it in 2 steps. I could specify return current.save. And when I get over here, I could get it then. So current was my old default department. And here I could specify my new default. I could save that. If I really wanted to, I could do a promise.all to maybe make this a little bit cleaner here. But in either event, I want to return this as a promise. So again, I'm taking my value, setting its default to true, getting my default department, setting its default to false, saving it, and then saving my new default. And that should be enough to get set default to actually true. So here I was able to change engineering to be my default department. So that's kind of powerful. So I've got the ability to call get default to get my default department. If I want to change my default department, I could end up doing set default. And again, this really is enough to get your test to get your model set up. It's about all you really need for your models to get set up. And at this point, you can have you can be fairly confident that your models are working properly. And this allows you to go in and start defining your routes. Again, where you're going to have one route for looking at an individual department. If we go back here, we can see where we've got our home route. Somehow I've lost my internet access. Let's try to get it back here. Now, in any event, one of the things that we can end up doing, if this was working, I'd be able to show it to you. But we're going to set up our routes. So we're going to have our routes for, and we can focus at this point on, hey, look, once we end up having a default department, at that point, we'll have the ability to go in and create some routes where we can end up creating a department and where we could end up adding some employees to that department. But this really sort of concludes, how much we'll be having to do to set our models up.